Ghost Hunt at Hagood Mill in Pickens, South Carolina, June 14, 2025. Tickets are $25 and are sold on Eventbrite and in person at the Dark, Strange and Mysterious Market in Easley, SC on June 13th and 14th. Special guests for the Ghost Hunt is Brandon Cooper and Blaine Rohan. Hagood Mill is known for its rich history and mysterious activity. Can you see spirits? Can ghosts talk to you? Find out. Ghost Hunt, June 14, 2025. Tickets cost $25. We will gather at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time and do a history haunting tour until midnight.
Guardian.
Hey. How's it going?
I've been doing fine. How are you?
I'm good. So, Guardian, your dog is having a little fit?
Oh, he gets wound up. I think the neighbor kids are out playing in the front yard again or toward the lot there so you can see him out the window.
Yeah.
He's guarding the house.
Guarding the house. All right. So we have a guest on tonight. He is going to be the MC at Connecticut Paracon. And if I butcher this, I'm sorry. It's Michael Rosser. So I'm just going to bring him on. Did I get it right? Hey.
Roser, but you were close enough.
Roser. Sorry. I hate butchering names. Yeah. So how are you tonight?
Doing very well, thank you, and I appreciate you both having me on to promote this fantastic Paracon that is put on every year in two different locations, generally two different states, by Thomas Gormley and Charles F. Rosenay. So I'm very much looking forward to this endeavor, and of course our show this evening.
Yes, thank you for coming on. We appreciate it. Yeah, I had told you before the show that I'm going to be there. I don't think Shawn's going to be able to attend, but we're looking forward to it.
Fantastic.
All right. So what do you have in plan? What do you plan to do? Something different? Do you have a booth of your own or anything like that?
So my primary role in all of this is to host the events. So I'll be there to introduce and walk off, certain guests and what have you. I always have a little booth on the side. Now, I generally don't have anything to sell, but in many cases, I'm promoting the documentaries that I've done, or I have things to display from different locations, specifically from Montauk and Camp Hero. I've worked with that avenue for a great many of years, and definitely have had artifacts that have come into my possession that had to either do with the radar tower or the Montauk project itself. So those I bring with me, including the different artifacts I have from Belize and my jaunt down there doing archaeological work in a very empirical sense about 3 years ago. So it's worth coming over, saying hello, and checking out some of these cool items.
Nice. Very nice. Well, we got Tom. Or Thorn. Excuse me. I can't read tonight. And we got Mort. Mort said he's going to be there. I'll see you there. All right. So, Well, tell us what I know you do documentaries, so tell us about you, because people want to come out and see you too. I've heard you're awesome as an MC, so tell us.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Very kind words. I started in this field back in the early 90s in terms of curiosity. It might have been even a little bit earlier than that, but, to act upon what was available at the time was more difficult than it is today. I mean, in many cases, we could say that the fields are saturated with information, dealing with the paranormal, cryptozoology, you name it, ufology, whatever it is. So I had experiences that I could parallel with some of the literature that I was coming across, probably starting in the mid 90s. And this grew my fascination even more and brought me into a different avenue of interpretation, which was generally based in spirituality and research that was akin to that type of thing. And, I got into sacred geometry, that was his name, Melchizedek, and his course, The Flower of Life. That was a big part of, my teenage years. Betty J. Eady wrote a book called Embraced by the Light. That was essentially my doorway into understanding life after death and those type of spiritual experiences. And, things kind of just spiraled upward from that point. Always keeping my foot in the esoteric field. I'm a musician as well. Done many albums on different genres and toured extensively with that in mind. But again, keeping my foot still firm in that other research. Now, around 2002, I was afforded an opportunity to begin a radio show, and this is where my radio career began. And, throughout the years that followed, I would either work with that or I had other endeavors that, would sort of correspond with that type of expression. So while I was not on the radio since 2002 consistently all the way to where we are today, I had other avenues that I would follow. And it was back in, I think, 2019 that I finally sucked it up and joined YouTube, which at the time I didn't realize was becoming such a large outlet for this type of sourcing information. My interpretation that was really still just for kids or people messing about. And boy, was I wrong. So there was one gentleman who got me into that. And, I took it from there. I had already been doing some things on peripheral apps, if you will, at that time, but was more in line with what you would imagine traditional radio to be. From that point, and again, just giving you the bullet point details here, I met Rich Giordano of GoofOn, who is a very, very, very good friend of mine. And through him, I ended up meeting Third Phase of Moon. And we have all worked extensively in the field, specifically of ufology. But of course, this has crossed over in different interests, especially when I brought to the table things about black projects or secret space programs, and you name it. So I've been very fortunate to network with the right people. And even in doing these Paracons, is because I had Charles F. Rosenet on the show, and I believe Thomas came with him the first time. I can't remember, but I believe he did. And, he just enjoyed my presence enough that he asked me if I would do these Paracons, which I very much obliged and have never looked back.
Great.
That's awesome.
It very much is.
So
you said you go over. I'm sorry, Shawn. Go ahead.
What do you think your specialty is? What do you like the most in the paranormal and the UFOs and etc.? What is your specialty that you like the most?
In my interest, I'm more of a Renaissance man because I've come to realize after, many, many years of not only my own personal experiences, but, delving into the research of others, that this is all connected in one way or another. And it may not be as direct as people believe, but there's a connection. And the utilization of certain topics within the field may have been encompassed under one umbrella project or endeavor that, again, expands upon, these different tendrils that seem less significant when they're on their own, and yet when you bring them into a more comprehensive fashion, we see a much bigger picture, and that generally illustrates the reality that we were after in terms of that interpretation. So I'm across the board with this, and obviously for good reason in terms of those connections.
That's interesting. Cool. Definitely cool.
Now you spoke about cryptozoology. Are you into is that why you went overseas, or was it more archaeology type thing?
When I went overseas to Belize, that was specifically for archaeology. We were privy to a particular plot within the jungle, and we're talking a massive amount of acres here that was owned privately. And it was always suspected that there were Mayan ruins within this plot, and yet the owner, who was aging at that time, had never had the opportunity or withal to go out there and investigate himself. So I went with a group of people, and we ended up going through the jungle, just trailblazing with one traditional bushman to guide us. And I mean, believe me, if that guy disappeared, you wouldn't be seeing me today. There was no way out, no cell phone service. We're 16 miles down the coast and then another 5 miles into the jungle, just trying to do this. And we ended up finding Olmec ruins, which predate the Mayan civilization, which was very interesting. But in terms of cryptozoology, I have gone out in the field many a time. In fact, I'm actually filming a documentary I've been working on the last year and a half with Long Island Bigfoot, Mike Colantonio. And he's opened my eyes to a different interpretation that sometimes lies beyond the physical affect that we observe when it comes to these different cryptids. I mean, I've been in investigations with him, if you want to call them that, more like forays out into the forest to commune, because this is a natural design and course for him. I've witnessed what appear to be elementals appear in front of my eyes in the brush, and as I see them, they disappear, and I see the background of the foliage, which I could not see within the obscured view of that particular entity. So it's enough that I have my own convictions in terms of belief. I mean, the forest itself is a living, energetic grid of consciousness, and sometimes we see that manifested physically in the sense that there is an actual entity present, and other times they are sort of dormant in terms of our interpretation of what we're able to perceive, but it's still the same energy. It's just our interpretation is different.
Right.
Oh, yeah, most definitely. Most definitely. When you were on your trip, on your archaeological trip, what unique things did you find?
We found an old road that we were able to somewhat map with the moment that we had where we had found this site. I mean, generally we were looking at anomalies from satellite imaging that we had done prior to, and we were trying to follow out to those particular areas just to see what it was that we were looking at from satellite. And yeah, so we were able to determine that we had the beginnings of what was probably a pyramid that had been, soiled over, in many, many years. And yet, we just kind of were there on this first jaunt out to map this and say, okay, there's something here. We can come back and excavate, which unfortunately in that particular leg of the project, we did not have the opportunity to do again. But that memory of that discovery is very much still alive in my mind. And it wasn't the first archaeological discovery that I had made in an original sense. I also found something up at America's Stonehenge. It was a Phoenician letter that had been imbued into a stone that nobody had noticed. So that was another original discovery. So yeah, that was our primary purpose going out on that journey.
That's amazing.
Yeah,
Did the owner, you said he had never been able to I guess look at all his property and find things. What did he say? Was he excited or amazed with that you found?
I think it was within his expectations that we were going to find something. And there was another incident where we did find a thieving site. And it does happen, unfortunately. A lot of times people from America specifically will come down, hire some of the natives that are there, and they'll go out and they'll dig on people's property and just steal whatever they found. Now they did. And there were two very large pits, I think, that measured probably 5 by 6 and then went down about 11, 12 feet. Round about the 9th level, they'd hit the water table, and that started to fill up. But they did extract artifacts that I did have the opportunity to see in photographs that were sent to us, because in some ways, from my understanding, people will come into a site like that and they will, take whatever they take, and then they can sell it back to the owner whom they've stolen it from for whatever profit it's worth. I don't know what the politic on that is, but this was my understanding in terms of what the owner was describing. And unfortunately, I was not allowed to document any of that outside of what I can anecdotally share.
Right. That's sad. It's very sad.
Yep.
Yeah, especially with what they were finding, and if it had any knowledge to go with something else as well.
I didn't see anything that really represented, otherworldly connections, the way that my friend Shawn is in Mexico digging these artifacts out of the ground by hand, is making those connections between where he is locally and Egypt, and the ancient connections we've apparently had with different races of extraterrestrials, if you want to call them that. Maybe they're more terrestrial than not, so I'm careful with that description.
Right.
But they were still fascinating to see these different items that were mostly comprised of jade, which was, again, something to be expected for that time period.
Right. That's still amazing. You said there were, I guess, maybe a pyramid that just, sank or was buried. Did you guys get to see any of the writings on the walls or the carvings? I mean, anything? Or was it too far down?
This was completely submerged in foliage and vegetation. We could make out the outline because in many cases we know what we're looking at prior to some sort of dig. If you go back into some of the more known sites that we have today as they've been unearthed and look at these older pictures, it barely looks like there's anything there. You just see the rises and the serpentine walls. Things are buried in the soil that indicate there was a civilization. So that's pretty much what we were up against at that point. Now, going further into the trip, we did come across another site, which we were then able to communicate and work with the Mayan people down there, the alcalde, who vetted us to be able to do this type of thing. And there were subsequent expeditions that went back for some of that clearing that I did not attend. Now, unfortunately, I've signed an NDA. I can only say so much about that location. And yet at the same time, I don't know if that group will continue to investigate that the way that we had originally set out. A lot of dynamics within the company I was a part of have shifted, and myself included. I've left the company, and there were certain reasons for that. There were a couple other members who had done the same as I for very similar reasons. But that being said, it seems today they may be focused on the tours of some of these ancient sites, which is fine in and of its own right. I wish them all the best, but I really believe we had something that nobody else at the time that we were working with those Mayans. And, my disappointment is seeing that opportunity leave in any fashion. But it is what it is.
Right.
So the pyramid. Oh, go ahead, Gwen.
No, go ahead.
The pyramid that you found from the satellite or the imagery, was it linked to any ley lines? Did you notice that? Did you look into any research on if it was linked to ley lines?
No, I didn't personally, and I don't think anyone else in the group did either. They were more concerned, trying to get back to that site and hit it with LiDAR scanning, do some GPR, some of the precursory work that goes into archaeology. I think that's what took most of their attention at that time. And it's not to say that we wouldn't have gotten into that at some point, but we just didn't get there.
Yeah, because I have heard that some of the pyramids are linked to ley lines where they were getting energy from as well.
Absolutely. And if we go on the theory that is becoming more accepted than not, wherein a lot of these pyramids were used in an amplification system for that type of energy, whatever kind of energy they were working with, could be even electrical to some degree. But, the idea is that they were generators and they created some sort of ceiling that people, not just within the vicinity, but even miles and miles away, were able to tap into with whatever ancient technology they had at the helm in order to do this. So it would make sense, going into the grid of the Earth and what that looks like, how the energy flows from one sect to the next, and the ancillary abilities of these particular pyramids, at least in theory, it lines up.
Yeah, that's something I'm really interested in, is the Egyptian side of things. They also said possibly the Ark had something to do with the energy sources there as well with some of the pyramids. You think that's possible as well?
I'm not sure, only because I see the Ark as somewhat of a separate entity, but at the same time, maybe during the Great Flood, this was being utilized in one way, shape, or form for navigation, or at least knowing where that was at any given point in time. We have to keep in mind that there's a lot of technology, quote unquote, that has been lost. That we come up with different methods of achieving, perhaps even more complex in some senses, but it wasn't necessary to do that. It's more superfluous in the end, given the path that we've gone, wherein we've lost the understanding of what pyramids hold in terms of certain power. And this goes all the way into something more modern where, I think it was a number of years ago, a friend of mine showed me a hollow pyramid that he had picked up, wherein you could throw your razor for shaving in this thing, and it would literally regenerate some of those atoms that are lost during the process of shaving. And so it was never dull. And as long as I knew the guy, he had a very sharp razor every morning he got up to shave. So, just as one small example of this ancient technology that was probably more accessible to the masses rather than what we're working with today, being much more secular with that type of technology, given the organization, faction, or intention behind its usage.
Right. That's interesting. So, do you have a documentary that is your, I guess, favorite or about to come out that you would like to talk about?
One created outside of what I'm doing or within my circle?
Any of them. It's yours, right? So.
Well, working with Third Phase of Moon, they have been putting out documentaries left and right, and these are very high-profile documentaries that have received, critical acclaim, from Amazon. Yes. They've been sitting at the #1 spot for months on end with each one of these that they released. And the last one was entitled Nexus, and this covered basically the women in ufology. And Linda Moulton Howe was fantastic in there. Carrie Cassidy, Apollo Asteria. There was a wonderful lineup of voices and personalities to talk about what each of them had an expertise in terms of, ufology. So I'm always very impressed with what the Cousins brothers put out. I think it's, fantastic production. They always have a vision that they fulfill, and they do it in a certain amount of time that is unfathomable in terms of how they work, but they're very minimalistic in what they bring on in terms of a crew and how this is shot. But it doesn't look that way when you watch the final rendition of what they put together. So I would go with that. I mean, Greer is in a lot of these as well. Unacknowledged is a very well-known documentary. I think that these guys have expounded infinitely into, different territories that you may have had questions about watching Unacknowledged, and then these are now approached in different ways, through their productions. So, yeah, I mean, honestly, that's kind of where with certain things. I mean, the documentaries I make are fantastic too, in my opinion, but they don't cover the same sort of thing that Third Phase does in terms of that format. I'm a little more broad stroked when it comes to certain topics and so forth.
I've seen this week, actually, I made sure that I saw a little bit of this, a little bit of that. But you guys do great work. You do. With all the shows, I don't have time to just sit there, but I did try to check you out as much as possible. But you did great work. So your music career, was that like did you start a teenage band or something like that? Or how did you get started?
I've always had an affinity for music, and that's a great question. I'd say around 6 years old, I started playing piano. Hated it because, honestly, I couldn't connect with this. I wasn't playing anything that I wanted to. So it was just exercise and, sort of very tumultuous in certain respects. But, around the age of 8, 9, I started trying different instruments, and a lot of this went into orchestration. So, I played clarinet, I'd play the oboe, I'd play this, that, and the other thing. And just trying to get a feel of where my interest lay. And I remember my father buying me an acoustic guitar at one point, and he must have been thinking in his head, well, I'm just buying him the entire orchestra here. He's got to, come up with something, because he's an avid piano player and, plays by ear, but he's a wonderful composer in that sense. And I remember kind of messing around with this guitar, and sometime later I saw Guns N' Roses' November Rain, that video. And when I saw Slash stand on the piano and hit those first 3-4 notes, I said, that's what I want to do. And I went and told my parents, and they were like, all right, well, okay. So I did end up getting an electric guitar and started getting some lessons, started that band that you mentioned. And unfortunately, about 6 months into, knowing these boys, they moved away, several towns out. And I was devastated, because to me, this meant I couldn't make music anymore. So I remember going downstairs into the basement at one point, and I saw my sister, she had a karaoke machine, was known as a Singleodian back then. And I thought to myself, well, let me just try something. There was a dual cassette tape player here, and I thought maybe I could play the music on this cassette, and then I could play something over it, and it would record on the second one, and then I could bounce it back. Just something I came up with out of nowhere. Sure enough, that's how I started making and composing music myself, was just understanding how that worked. And that opened up the doors significantly for me and my career that followed.
That's cool. Did you see Thomas's comment? Can you see that?
I can't see anything because I have glasses, but I don't know where they are. What does he say?
I got it. Okay, well, I was wondering because he's, of course, Thomas says, "Hello, you glorious weirdos." Yes, that's
Hello,
that's the group. That's his, you know, that's his thing.
it's
Then
Thomas.
he says, he's a fantastic. Let's see, he is fantastic at cowbell. Love you, brother. Haha. So we love you, Thomas.
Yeah.
Thomas always shows up for the shows, and I appreciate that. And I told him you were coming on, and he was like, "Awesome!" So you know that was good.
Thomas is the man. You know, Charles is the same. They're one and the same for me. You know, in terms of that personality, both fantastic individuals.
Yes, I agree. I've had one Nathaniel Elwell. I do his. I produce his show, and he had Tom and Charles on, and I got to talk with Charles a little bit, and that was awesome. It's just my first time, but they're actually going to be on this show soon, Thomas. So I get to speak to them again. That'll be awesome. But yeah, we're. I think everybody that's coming to the Paracon is, especially now, because you are very much more interesting than your little snippet says you are, which is cool. But you really
well, thank
are.
you.
So,
I mean, it's a lot to cover, you know what I mean? And, you know, there are people who know who I am and what I've done, and there are others who just get little, you know, whispers on the breeze, if you will. But, you know, affording a conversation like this certainly opens up, you know, that path of discussion. And, you know, again, I appreciate we're doing this tonight.
oh, that's awesome. But yeah, when I saw you, like I said, I look into whoever the guest is, and oh my goodness, he's being silly. Poke the cow. Hashtag poke the cow.
No.
Nathaniel's show again, by the way.
Yeah, he's trying to spread poke the cow for sure.
Poke the cow. Yes, Thomas. Hashtag poke the cow. You're so funny. But yeah, I looked you up and I was like, okay, he's not just an MC. You know, he's not just a musician. He's not just a is it documentarian?
Yes.
Am I saying it right? I mean, you have like a lot more stuff that you have not even talked about. I've seen listed. So I was like, dang, you guys have, our MC is like, you know, should have a table and be a speaker on his own. Do you do that? Do you ever talk about your stuff like on stage or anything?
I have, yes. You know, for one reason or another, I think, you know, Charles and Thomas have a specific vision for, you know, their conventions. And, you know, I absolutely respect that. If there comes a day that they ask me to speak, you know, I'll be enthralled to do so. But it's certainly not something I would push, you know, already having a position there and, you know, being helpful the way that I am. Although, you know, I enjoy doing that very much. It's a lot of fun. And, you know, to put something together like that is oftentimes engaging for the audience. And when I have afforded this opportunity, the conversations I have with folks after the fact, I find to be even more impactful than perhaps the presentation, which initiated the inquiry. So that I always get a kick out of that.
That is awesome. I'm sure people will be stopping by your little setup there and saying, I know you from something different. So somebody will. Absolutely.
I hope so.
Yeah. So that'll be fun. Shawn, I'm talking too much, so you go ahead, son.
Well, that's fine. Being a musician, have you ever had the opportunity to use frequencies in any of your subjects and got results from anything unique?
Frequencies in what respect?
Like a response back or getting something to respond back to you? Have you ever had the opportunity to use any type like that since you're a musician and having some of that knowledge and background, being able to do stuff like that?
I think I understand what you're asking. And, you know, I'll have to tell you that, you know, obviously going into, you know, especially the world of the paranormal, we have to look at everything in terms of vibration and how those vibrations are affected or whether they conflict or have a synergistic affect. I've had a lot of questions when it comes to, you know, utilizing technology in this way. And yes, there have been times that, you know, I've been able to capture XYZ given a certain method. But to sort of formulate, I think, something on a broader sense, you know, when we talk about frequency, to hone that in would probably take a little more thought and perhaps reserve when it came to that methodology overall. And in some cases, I think this has been explored. I mean, not that I like to talk about ghost adventures or anything like that, but there were a couple people that were very involved in creating new technology that were based on scientific principles within the audio world. And I always found that very interesting, but there's a lot that goes into that type of discovery and investment to, put your time, your finances into something like this. I've been more on the outside of that type of work, even though I've been engaged here and there, as a clairvoyant and someone who's very sensitive and empathic. I found for me, in my own convictions, that my body has been the best tool that I have at my disposal. And then, of course, like a lot of groups, you feel something, you try to back it up scientifically. Sometimes you're successful with that. Other times you may not be, but you still walk away with the conviction that you had an experience that you can't explain. So that's pretty much where I sit on with that end.
Yeah, I definitely agree with using yourself as a tool to understand certain things, because that's what I do as well. But frequency is always a curiosity for me, as in the fact that you hear certain things and you try to figure out what they're linked to. I mean, some typical noises, but is it actually something from beyond sometimes that you can't quite tune into? And it's always fascinating to try to dig into that path of that as well.
Well, what they have to do, any sort of spirit that wants to communicate on this level, is they have to come within that band of frequency that we can interpret and sometimes even hear. So while they exist in some form outside of that, they lower a vibration enough that they can come in for just a moment, say that 1 or 2 word sentence to you, and then they may have to pull back, as this is maybe draining, or there's an effort in there, again, to come down to the level of that communication, which really starts with us. The level of hearing is from 20 hertz to 20,000 kilohertz. And for example, in the cryptozoology world, I've definitely analyzed many audio clips that purported to be from Sasquatch. And I would look at the measured chest cavity within those frequencies. I'd look at the head resonance. Does all of this kind of comply with what we see from a human being? Or is it actually something bigger that we can then assess based on those findings within the frequency analysis? And sometimes it's the latter of these things. I'm finding that whatever made that sound had an abnormal sized chest cavity. The vocal box could have been much deeper than somebody would have initially thought from the first hearing. I mean, you name it. We've definitely been able to quantify some of that.
Wow. That's cool. That's very interesting, because I've heard that sometimes even some of the noises that a Sasquatch would actually make you sick sometimes, or make you awkward, or how do I say, affect your equilibrium.
Like dizzy.
Absolutely.
I've heard people say they make you dizzy. It's just that how that is.
Well, I mean, we have sonic weapons, and we've had sonic weaponry for quite a bit of time now. And generally, this is used to break up riots or large crowds. A lot of people are familiar with the brown note, okay? And that's just one example of that accumulated knowledge in how to direct sound as a more physical force rather than something that we're already familiar with in terms of, how we use it. So, these different creatures or entities may very well have more of an understanding of how to produce some of that. And again, when you talk about Sasquatch or some of the other cryptids, there seems to be a very transparent and esoteric element to their existence, wherein they can be here in the physical reality the way that's tangible to us, and yet flip into another side of reality that essentially you just need to raise your overall frequency for. So for the example that I generally give, let's say that my body vibrates at X, okay, as a factor. Everything around me is X. That's how we can exist in this space at the moment. If I were to create even a synthetic Merkaba of some sort, or an electromagnetic field that encompassed me, that I could then try and interact with the rest of my reality at X plus 1, I'm putting my hands through walls. I'm going to fall through the floor. I'm not going to be a part of this reality based on that math, that again is just being very simply explained for the moment. So, at the core of a lot of these theories and these thoughts is a very fundamental, equation that we don't have to go so deep into to understand. I mean, conceptually, it's right there at our fingertips.
All right.
Now to
Yeah, because
execute it is a little bit of a different story.
yeah, because I have read articles and did some research into some stuff. Is in the fact if your body can match the frequency of an object, you should be able to move it or go through it. So that's always kind of interested me as well.
Oh, absolutely. And at the very core of all of this, talking about how everything's in vibration, into the atoms and so forth. Well, if there's vibration, there's sound. And if there's vibration that exists within its own space synergistically with other bands of vibration, they're technically making music. Now, we may not be able to hear this, but technically our entire reality is musical.
Yeah, it actually is. Rez is saying, we have a viewer named Resnick. He's a friend of ours, and he says, yes, he agrees with what you're saying with that. So, and we got a couple other people. If you don't mind, let's see, Resnick. We got Victor, Thomas, of course. Now these are the people that are. I know Thorne was in there, and Gabby, and Mort, and a couple others. But I'll tell you, you're not just the MC for sure. I know I keep saying that, but when it was amazing to me to look it up and go, they made a great choice. So they're interesting for sure.
Well, I'm delighted to be able to share these things.
I had somebody actually messaging me saying you are awesome. So I was like, yeah, he is. All right, Thomas, you got any questions for our guest here? If he's even watching, he might answer. Go ahead, Shawn. I'm sorry.
He's poking the cow.
He's poking the cow.
He's poking the cow. Now you've talked about UFOs and stuff. What's the most interesting picture you've seen or actually witnessed of a UFO?
So this one is a little detailed. I'm going to start off by kind of superficially answering this question, and then I'm going to go into something else, and you'll see why I began the way I did. I've seen a multitude of what I would consider to be UFOs in the sky, and this is outside of the knowledge that we have with Starlink or iridium flare satellites or anything else that you would commonly see in the sky that seems anomalous and yet has a very grounded reality behind it. In most cases, I see it. I go, oh, look at that. Oh, starting this. Oh, cool. I'm going to go and buy some bread and milk in the store. It's not much more I can do with a floating dot, but I acknowledge it, right? Yeah. There were two experiences I had. One when I was 19 and the other when I was 26, where I actually saw full-on craft. And the first one, just to kind of go over very quickly, was about 2 a.m. I was locking up the house for the evening, and I saw a UFO, like a Bob Lazar classic model, sitting right above a tree line, probably about, I'd say about 2.5, maybe 3 miles away. And where I was living at the time was very close to the ocean, and we had a sub base over that way. It's still there, but it was close to that area, and I could see it. And I grabbed the binoculars, put those on, and getting a very close view, getting a closer view of this, I could see the rotating bands of color and light that were, in the center of this thing, and that's when I saw that saucer shape. So, I'm thinking to myself, I've got a camera. It was 8mm in the room next to me. I said, I got to grab this. And something in my head says, if you look away, it will be gone. So I said, okay, I'm actually going to listen to this voice for a moment. And sure enough, I stayed there for another 10, 15 minutes looking at this object, just sort of hovering above the tree line. I said, that's it. I'm going to go and grab this. So I ran over, took literally 7 to 10 seconds to pick this thing up, come back, and it was gone. I said, oh, okay. So just kind of banked that memory away. Now, when I was 26, this was back in, maybe 2005. I had just gotten out of college. I was saving up to get my own place. So I was still at my parents' house. And my parents left for the evening to go out to eat. And I get a call on the phone about 3 or 4 minutes after they depart. My mother says, hey, go look at the sky outside your window. I said, why? She goes, just go look at it and tell me what you think that is. So I peer out the window and I see a TR-3B. See the 3 lights. And the middle one was not a light, but I could still see the faint outline of what that shape was. And this was probably no more than 4, 5, maybe 600 feet off the ground. It was incredibly close. I said to her, well, what do you think that is? She goes, I don't know. It just looks like 3 anomalous lights, but I'm underneath it. And I could see some of, again, that outline. So Same sort of scenario. I'm sitting there looking at this thing. It's stationary in the sky. Obviously, no sound associated. This time, my camera is literally feet away from me. I could just take a dive, jump over there, grab it, come back. But in my head, I hear, "Don't look away, or it'll be gone." So, do the same exact thing. Plays out just this way. Went to reach for the camera, look back, boom, gone instantly. So.
Wow.
There was some communication in my mind that was happening, and there must have been a reason that I was seeing what I was seeing. Now, maybe I can't explain what that is yet, but there's a bit of life left to live. Hopefully that will be revealed. Now,
Right.
I pre-posted this answer in such a way because I work with Dr. Jonathan Reed, who has one of the most incredible cases of extraterrestrial contact ever documented, and this began back in 1996 in Washington State. Long story short, because I don't want to get into that whole story right now. We're limited on time. If you'd like to have me back at some point, I can certainly illustrate this in more detail.
Yeah.
But this was something. Look, I found the video that he had put out there at some point years ago, and this is really him running around in the woods after an incident where he hits an alien on the back of the head after he kills his dog, and now he's panicking and he's sick, and if you've never seen this video, I highly recommend checking it out. There are 2 interviews on my channel right now that displays a lot of this evidence. And Dr. J Radio Live, who had done it before me, I think he did at least 2, if it wasn't 3 interviews that, again, are very comprehensive covering this case. But, he brings this alien back to his house and performs an autopsy on it, which he then records. But if you watch it, you can see the thing's playing possum. The eyes are still moving, somewhat blinking. You see the facial muscles contorting, even when he's pulling, back the head, and you see the blood and you see the skull fragments. This thing is still alive. And long story short, he puts it in a hunting freezer, thinking that he was going to preserve it. And during the time that he had this in his possession, there were a multitude of individuals who swung by the house to see this, constituents, family, friends, people he had worked with. He was a medical doctor. So, there was a lot of interest in what he wanted to show. And again, so a lot of people did see this firsthand. Well, some days later, this thing screams, pops up out of the freezer, and Jonathan eventually starts trying to have a conversation with him. Well, again, through certain detail, they couldn't do it audibly. So the extraterrestrial, who he's named Freddy, started trying to do this telepathically, which there was some success, but Jonathan was very overwhelmed. So there was an evening period where they had to kind of see what each other could take in terms of the communication, and they were eventually able to come to something that coalesced. And again, long story short, this entity was with him for the better part of 8 days or so. I think it may have been a couple more. I'd have to just go back on that detail, but regardless, he came down to see this one morning, and there were these little wet footprints that led directly into the wall, and Freddy was gone. Now, when I got involved with Dr. Jonathan Reed, we did our first interview, and Dr. J sat Shiva with me. And after the show, Jonathan said, "Hey, Michael, there are a couple things I want to mention to you." I said, "Yeah, what's going on?" He goes, "Before you go any further into this, there's 2 things I have to tell you." I said, "Okay." He says, "The first is you may be attacked." I said, "Okay, I understand that. And today, I understand that that's more of a concern than the grain of salt I took it with initially. Because, look, I've talked to government factions who already knew who I was. I've seen them come into my shows. I've seen them come into other shows. Oh, we're watching you. Well, guess what? I'm watching you too. That's sort of the banter that goes back and forth. So, to an extent, I didn't have the caution that I do now with this case because I've seen certain things well after the fact that didn't involve me, specifically, but it very well me, sort of thing. Let's put it that way. And the other thing he mentioned is that Freddy has visited other interviewers in the past, and people who were interested in the story said, just be aware that there's a possibility he could visit you. Now, I've had plenty of paranormal experiences, and as I've mentioned, something within the elemental world, perhaps cryptozoology, seen the UFOs, but I've never had direct contact with extraterrestrials, whether it be in dream or seeing them in person. None of this, really. And sure enough, about 3 weeks after I had that conversation with him, and we were slated for another show, Freddy showed up in my room. But he wasn't alone. He had 3 other entities with him that were ribbon-like, just made of light, that were floating about 3 feet off of the floor. And I don't know if these were navigators, guides, support, whatever they were. They were a different type of consciousness that I was aware was conscious, but I could not interact and communicate with them. They were kind of like plants in the sense that we would, think of, right? You're not going to have a direct conversation. It's a different form of that consciousness, but it's still alive. Meanwhile, the very chair that I'm sitting in now is where I saw Freddy. And in an instant, all of this happened. I realized we've been having a conversation for a good while about something very deep in the world of spirituality, philosophy, and he kind of says, "Oh, very well, okay, we're done." And that was the end of the conversation. Just like that, they all disappeared in front of me. Now, I probably didn't move for a good 10 minutes. My jaw was on the floor, and I'm thinking, what did I just experience? Now, it wasn't my first thought to go back to Jonathan's case. I just was, ensconced in that moment and what had happened. But when I kind of came to my senses, I said, I'm going to have to ask him about this because I need to know if this was something that related to what he had mentioned. So just before the next show that we got on, I said, Jonathan, I got to ask you something. He said, well, shoot. I said, this happened. Does this have anything to do with you? He goes, yeah, that was Freddy. And since then, Freddy's come to me at least 2 other times, not necessarily in the same capacity, but he was here and has come back to Jonathan independently and mentioned certain things about myself that, nobody's going to be able to make these up. And I'm not saying they're very, very specific details in terms of my person, but more so in terms of what my soul is, I guess, and perhaps who I am on that soul level. So I know I've been vetted by this entity. So there's a very long answer to your question.
Very interesting answer.
Yeah, definitely so.
Yes, we will definitely have you back on. So that'll be awesome.
Yeah.
But we do have one question from Thomas. He said, what is your opinion of why the Bridgewater Triangle attracts UFOs, cryptids, and supernatural?
Well, it's a combination of a couple different factors. The fact that the land itself is ancient, and I'll go into that in a moment. The tribes that lived there, and then King Philip's War. This plays into what I can see as land that was always incredibly powerful, and that energy that exists there could be used for positive means, and I'm sure it was many times, but because of the genocide and the slaughter that really happened, not just on a physical level, but emotionally, culturally, you name it, this energy has been tainted the way that, if I have running water and I drop food coloring to this, you're going to see a different color, but it's still the same water. So the energy acts very differently there now. And you have different pockets of what we would consider to be vortexes or portal-like activity that has been observed time and time over within a certain fluctuation. So, currently, it hasn't been as active as it has been in the past, but we're now seeing an uptick for one reason or another, whether it be logarithmic or something more even-keeled, remains to be determined. But by and large, I think those are the reasons in a compositive sense here that we see that type of activity. Now, a lot of this has been ongoing. So once you feed the beast, it grows. And we had the Freetown State Forest where a lot of bad things happened up into the current day. And that forest holds all that energy. It's imbued with it. So going back to the ancient land itself, we have to look at where things were during times of Pangea. So, for example, Long Island was part of Egypt. So technically, when you walk on Long Island, you're walking on Egyptian land. And, we can go back into, the history of that in and of itself and say that, there's more connection between Egypt and the Northeast than you would ever imagine. And this goes into, their pyramidal structures, the fact that Mars is revered as much, with the Algonquins especially. And, we have Cairo, which means Mars. Mars was basically the biggest celestial entity that every culture that had substance, would look at. And, when I was researching this a number of years ago, I thought, well, why not the moon? We see the moon a lot. Well, it's a satellite. It's not like what Mars is. And our connection to Mars goes deeper than anybody could imagine. So I'll give you one example. And of course, we're talking about this whole area. But specifically in Long Island, the tribes that were there when the colonists came over, they noticed that there were big pyramids and there were smaller pyramids. And they said, wow, these are fantastic. How'd you build them? And they said, well, you see the big ones over there? And they'd say, yes. And they said, well, we built those with a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. And the colonists said, oh, okay. Well, what about the smaller ones? They go, yeah, we didn't build those. They're from the people from Mars. Come down here, steal our women and children. We don't like them. But it has something to do with some grid system that they work with energetically. We don't really understand, but they're utilizing it. So there's just one story, and this comes directly from Peter Moon's research. You could go much deeper into what he has to offer in that sense, and he even has a picture of one of these colonists standing in front of the smaller pyramid, which is about 13 to 15 feet high. Assumably, these are all buried in the sand out there today, but we don't really know what became of them. But that being said, again, the land itself was sacred, and it has been defiled since. And Long Island is no different, with many of the things that occurred there, even going into the Montauk Project and so forth. We just see this repetitious cycle of the darker side of learning what it means to be a human being, at very least. And these are continued, for whatever reason, to be repeated. But yeah, that's where I would start with that.
Interesting.
Yeah, very interesting. Did that get you there, Thomas?
I could definitely sit and talk with him for a long time about a lot of different things, because I definitely like the Black projects, to talk about some of them as well. But wow. Yeah. It kind of gives me a new perspective knowing about Long Island now, but I never quite knew that one. But that's interesting. Just
the tip of the iceberg. All puns intended there, and how the sun was created. Let's put it that way. I mean, look, we found a pyramid about 1.5 miles, 2 miles off the coast of New York, and this was underwater. And it's since been scrubbed from anything that you can find in terms of those maps. So we have the proof, we have the pictures. And we know that there were civilizations that existed over there well before this was an ocean itself. So there's a lot buried here that it's just up to us to really get into the thick and thin to find some of the answers that, again, connect what we know to be our familiar ancient history and elements that we are not familiar with and that seem more anomalous or esoteric.
Right.
Thomas is saying that he said we have had some great conversations. I bet so, Thomas. I bet so, because we have had some already, and we're just kind of snippet looking here.
Yeah, scratching the surface of this. But I do have one more question. What do you think about some of the sightings that they're seeing now with the UFO sightings? What's your opinion on them?
Can you be a little more specific? Because that's a very, very broad topic.
Well, the ones that's going faster than light, like a energy source, or the fact that they're seeing them in groups or packs from a distance. What's your opinion on those?
Well, a lot of what's happening now is probably leading us into a new era of understanding all of this. And there are factions of what I would just say for the moment, of government that have been working with this and continue to work with this on every level imaginable. And some of these entities that come in, look, I mean, the crafts that we see in our sky, about 90% of what you see is ours. And that's because we back engineered a lot of what we've reconnaissanced. The other 10% happens because there's an operator error, or something fails within the biological mechanical element of the ship itself. It's generally a mistake. Somebody forgot to hit a switch somewhere. And it seems weird because, we look at these extraterrestrials in a lot of ways as being omniscient or omnipotent in certain ways. And imagine that they would make a mistake too, but they do. They're very much like us in a sense. And even talking with Freddie and Jonathan relaying this information, Freddie's race is us from the future. That's where we evolve. Now, he doesn't live off planet. He lives on the bottom of the ocean floor somewhere in a cavern system that we're never going to get to. But that's where he was born. And his DNA sequencing went with, I think it was 40 chromosomes altogether. All but 9 were human, and the 9 was split between dolphins and sea turtles. So you had porpoise DNA along with sea turtles, and yet there was a human element that had a larger breadth that comprised this particular being. So we look at that and we understand that even now today, we have mastered to some degree the elements of time travel. And this is a very controversial subject, but there's reasons that I stand so vehemently behind this conviction. Again, we can get into it at another point in time. But that being said, I know we've done it. Just talking to Andrew Basiago, who was a part of Project Superman and Montauk, the testimonies I've received from certain people, I can look at some of those and say, all right, there might be an element of fantasy here. There might be an element of self-identification, and the psychology that goes into that person is very important to me, and having those type of discussions. And even though I can rule out some individuals that sit on that side of the fence, there are others I cannot. And they have more detailed conviction than they should have, even for what we're talking about. So that being said, with the UFOs we're seeing now, I mean, I've been told we might be on the precipice of a false flag invasion. And for us to keep that in the back of our mind, so that if something like this does roll out, very shortly here, we're going to be aware of it. We're going to know what we're looking at. And that's our greatest defense against something like this. We can't do anything about it initially, but to be educated and have the awareness that they can pull this off. And when they do, if they do, it's not going to be what it seems to be. And it's another deceptive maneuver by some of these shadow governments to convince us that we need to be controlled and that we need to fear anything that's not like us. I mean, the narrative has been with us for so many years. We're all sick and tired of it, but very few of us know what to do outside of that. So, we're seeing some more activity in this, but again, the brazen element that, our governments are bringing to the skies, they don't care if you think you know what you're seeing. The fact that we've witnessed these crafts have a supercavitation effect wherein they can go through different mediums. So they're transmedium, perhaps, or they have some sort of technology that allows that affect to be on display. Even going into what David Fravor has seen, or, some of these other pilots, they have this technology. It exists. And I believe that we live in two separate worlds. The common man lives on one side of the fence with all the inquiry and intelligence to execute some sort of understanding of this. And yet we're being deprived of that because there are others who have this technology, live in a different reality altogether, but are still here as part of our race and our time period that have expanded beyond anything we can even imagine. So I'll give you one more thing here. I spoke to somebody who was in the higher echelons of the Air Force at one point, and through this conversation, I had to ask the question. I said, about 20 years ago, we knew that the military was about 100 years ahead of the common person with terms of their technology. I said, 20 years later, where do we step today? And he looked at me and he said, "Oh, it's beyond anything you can imagine." And I had a quick laugh. I said, "No, wait, hold on. I can imagine teleportation. I can imagine controlled telekinesis, imagine time travel, you name it. I can imagine these things." And he goes, "Yeah, we're well beyond that now." I said, "So are you telling me, without being directly, transparent about this, space program did exist and some of the people that are out there talking about this actually went through what they said?" He goes, "Yeah, absolutely." I said, "Oh, okay." Now that opens up the paradigm of interpretation, like cracking an egg, not knowing what kind of world was outside that shell. Now you can see everything, and you just start on one foot after the other when it comes to information like that.
Right.
Yeah.
I do.
So I
remember.
did have one question for you. I'm sorry, Shawn. Tonight is just a weird night. Go ahead, Shawn.
I was going to say, I do remember Jesse Ventura when he was the governor of Minnesota. He says, "What they show in movies, you can't imagine what the military already has and what they're capable of doing because we have it. We're capable of doing it."
Absolutely. And then again, we're going to see that sort of statement come from a lot of different sources that aren't connected necessarily. And that's where the significance grows in terms of understanding that and coming to an intellectual deduction of that information that we can then actually paint a picture without being called crazy. Because we'll have certain evidence to back on as this sort of, again, conviction arises.
Most definitely. Yeah, we're definitely going to have you back because now I've got a ton of questions that I'm really curious about. We could probably go another couple of hours, because, like I said, I do
Definitely.
like the Egyptian stuff and the fact of portals and dimensions and teleportation, etc. as well. That's definitely an interesting factor I like.
Well,
Absolutely,
you
my
are a
friend.
very interesting guy, and I'm telling you, thank you, thank you, thank you. And yes, we are going to have you back if you will allow us to have you back there.
Absolutely. You just let me know. We'll set it up.
Oh, absolutely. So, well, let's plug one more time the Connecticut Paracon. Let's do that because you are very interesting. But that was the purpose, first of all. But I knew when I started looking into you, I was like, yeah. This is gonna be more than just a MC. So,
Yeah.
and I
Like I
appreciate
said,
it. We love it. We love
like I
it.
said, when I even started looking, I was like, yeah, me and him's got some things in common, and we can definitely dig into some conversations of things.
Yeah. Now, this is a question that I like to ask guests and anybody that does paranormal investigations. What is besides yourself, what is one of your first go-to pieces of equipment? It can be as simple as whatever, but just what is your go-to?
I always gravitate as the very first instrument I bring with me anywhere I'm going to go is something that can record audio because I'm looking for those EVPs. That seems to be the easiest form of communication that can be bridged between our side and theirs, and it doesn't seem to take too much energy from either side. So I've had a lot of positive experiences with any tool that work with that. I mean, going back to the little handheld tape recorders that we all had, to the more digital devices that we carry today, I don't find any difference in terms of that technology and its effectiveness. So that's something I always carry with me.
That's cool. That's absolutely cool. All right, guys, we're going to plug the con one more time, and we are going to thank Michael so very much. It's been so interesting.
Thank
I
you.
hate to get off of here. And we have tons of questions, so we're gonna have him back. So you guys watch out for that. But one more time, you want to plug the con for us? Because we want everybody to show up and actually get to meet you, and I'll be there. And there's 40 people that are guests that also will be there, plus everybody else. So what you got to say to them? Come out.
Me or Shawn?
You.
No,
Oh, yeah, come on out. I mean, every time we put something on like this, it's absolutely fantastic. Now, timing is everything, and I think this year we're right where we need to be.
Yes.
But we have a lot of fantastic guests that come out to speak, and they do it with their whole heart. And this isn't an event where you can't go up to these people and ask questions after the fact. I mean, they sit down at the booth, and I wouldn't say I've met anybody who was adverse to having those conversations. I think everybody's very welcoming in terms of that. They come at you with open arms. And a lot of them are just delighted that you're as interested and passionate about, these type of topics of conversation, at very least, as they are. And I mean, we've had people who have been in the public eye for a great many of years. Number of years, and they're still very grounded and they're humble individuals, and they'll sit and they'll talk. That's how I got close to James Anito, who then, in that moment I met Father Bob Bailey. Unfortunately, James has not been a part of the scene by choice, and that's fine. I wish him well. But, now I'm great friends with Father Bob Bailey and talk to him as often as I can. So you make these connections, and it's not just about networking. It's about getting to know the heart of a person. And when you come to our Paracons, this is what you're going to take away outside of anything else you expected to.
That's right. So, well, I hate to end the conversation, but it's been an hour, and thank you for your time. And we are going to, if you will let me put you backstage for a minute, and we'll have just a short, I won't keep you forever. And so we can get out of here for a minute. And yeah, I'll see you in a minute.
All right. Thank you very much, Gwen and Shawn.
Thank you.
thank you.
Very interesting guy. Very interesting.
Like I said, I could sit and talk with him for hours about a lot of things, and he brushed across a few things that I definitely am interested in, and it's awesome. I mean, he's got a lot of knowledge, and to be able to sit and talk with him, and that's amazing thing, because people like him, being able to make some of those connections to be able to figure out certain things and put pieces together is great because he does have a lot of knowledge.
He does. He absolutely. And we're going to thank him again backstage. But everybody, thank you for joining. If you see this later, look him up. If you see him now, look him up. He's definitely an interesting guy. And he seems down to earth himself. So I can't wait to get to Connecticut and actually have a minute with him, or a couple minutes at least. So, Shawn, is anything else before we say goodnight?
Well, are we going to have another show Thursday night?
I actually do have somebody, but I have to confirm it, so I'm gonna have to hold on to it for just a second.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, but that's our normal night, as most people know. But you have a guest on Sunday as well?
Yes, on Sunday on the Eternal Ex-Wolf Pack Paranormal, we will have Rez, and we'll be talking with him Sunday night. So definitely stop in and ask questions, because we will answer them live on the air as well.
That's right. And David, who just popped in, you can absolutely go back and watch it. So please do. And we probably will be on Thursday again. And, yes, Thomas, down the rabbit hole again. Oh, here we go.
That would definitely be a good show. Thomas, Michael, and a couple others, and go down that rabbit hole, because it would definitely get very interesting.
That would have to be like a 3 or 4 hour show.
at least a couple hours. At least a couple hours, because I know that can get pretty in depth.
It can. So you guys, I'm gonna tell you one more time. Watch all our shows, share, like, subscribe, all that good stuff. Just kind of have to pop it out there every once in a while. And thanks everybody. Thanks for our sponsors, and thank you, Shawn and Michael. And hey, we'll see you next show, which hopefully will be Tuesday. We'll put that out in just a little bit. So you guys have a good night.
All righty. Night, everyone.